I'm here with Corey Goode, the insider who has come forward with a remarkable story of the military-industrial complex colonizing our solar system and beyond, and having extensive interactions with a multitude of extraterrestrial beings. And Corey, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
All right. Let's just start with a basic question, throw this at you and see what you do. What is a star?
A star is definitely not what we're being told it is in school. A giant ball of gas on fire out in the middle of space.
Well, right away, you've just slapped all the skeptics in the face because they say that's scientifically proven. He's an idiot.
It has not been scientifically proven. It's scientific theory.
Right.
And
what do we, I mean, we see stuff coming off the sun that would imply that it's got hydrogen, right? There's hydrogen atoms coming off and there's oxygen and things like that.
Right. When I was assigned to the research vessel, there were expeditions to the sun to where probes were shot into the sun. And they would shoot these probes into sunspots.
Well, the first thing would be, how do you get a probe into the sun without it burning up?
Energy fields around.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the probes.
So a very high intensity energy field that shields it from being burned up.
Right. And it also collapsed from the
Gravitational, right.
What was seen from the telemetry that came back from these probes was amazing.
Really?
Yeah. The sun is electric. The people that are talking about the electric plasmic model of the universe, they're correct.
But that model usually excludes torsion fields.
Yes, it does. There's some stuff that needs to be, some information that needs to be married.
Right.
But there's obviously torsion fields are involved in not only the stars, the planets, the galaxy, and as I said before, I was shown that our entire universe is a giant torsion field.
So why did they pick a sunspot and not some other place?
Well, the telemetry from the inside of our star, Sol,
SOL is what they call it?
is what it's referred to.
Right.
There was a core that was fairly small, and they could tell it was made up of magnesium, sodium, I can't remember all the elements. And the outer...
Mostly metallic?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then the outer shell was made up of similar materials, but it was like an anode and cathode.
Okay.
So it was an electrical, almost like a light bulb. And the sunspots were going into the center of the sun like vortex filaments streaming into the center of the densest part in the middle of the star.
Similar to like a tornado, but
Right.
an energetic tornado.
Tiny, thin little tornado spirals and crisscrossing each other, spinning around, crisscrossing each other, and going and meeting down to the small center.
Well, it does make sense because a lot of times when we're looking at sunspots, we see actual rings burst out of the sun, tubes of energy. It's called a solar prominence. And you have this ring come out. And so you're saying that that's not just on the surface, that those go way down right to the core.
Right to the core.
Wow.
And these are also, at times, depending on the sun's behavior, stargates that are utilized by different extraterrestrial groups to go in and out of our solar system. And there was a wide open empty area inside the sun. Now there is a very large area outside, on the outside of the area I've described, that is molten and on fire. And they found out that it's hotter on the outside of the sun and cooler on the inside.
That is something available to most people. The corona, which is actually above the surface, is hotter, and then as you go down, it cools down, and that's considered a scientific mystery.
Right.
But the electric universe people account for that with the idea that the sun is an electrical energy generator, like you're saying.
And the sun, our soul, is being fed by some sort of waves that are hitting it. And that is what is causing the outside to be so active. And also, it is being fed through what I described as the cosmic web. Each sun, each star is connected to every other star through this cosmic web. And each one is connected through a filament, electromagnetic filament that we were describing, that connects each star. So things can happen in one solar system to one star, and there can be feedback through the system, this network, that can affect our solar system star.
In my third book, I wrote about a pyramid researcher named Joe Parr. And he has a propeller with little pyramids on the end that are only an inch long. And he rotates this thing through a series of opposing magnets. You got north to north, south to south, north to north. And what happens is, at certain times of the year, where the sun and the belt of Orion and then the Earth crosses through that like it's a gate, and it happens in late December, the pyramids on the end of the propeller would transmute out of our physical reality. They'd pop through the walls of the centrifuge and come out like a shotgun blast, and they'd actually embed into the wall, and there was no visible exit hole. So that he came up with a theory that there was some sort of energy conduit that affects the nature of matter when our Earth is crossing this beam between the sun and Orion, which only happens once a year in the Earth's orbit. So do you think it's possible that these plasma beams could do that to matter, could actually change the phase of matter like that?
Absolutely. That also goes back to this hyperdimensional mathematics model that was handed down to us that we use to calculate portal travel. With every star and planet and galaxy having a relationship with each other, you have to be able to calculate these things, because you can have weird little hiccups that can cause weird things like what you were talking about in that experiment.
Well, Pete Peterson has brought forward mathematics, and I met the guy who actually did it. I can't say his name because he doesn't want to come forward. But he basically calculated that the whole universe is Penrose tiled, meaning everything has an intersection of 3 lines. And if you count in base 6, meaning you go 1 through 6, and then you go 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5, 2, 6, 3, 1, 3, 2, like that.
Right.
If you calculate in base 6, then all of these numbers like pi and phi, they all become integers. They don't have a repeating decimal anymore. Do you think that these hyperdimensional mathematics operators that you were given are in some way like taking that into account? Is that the kind of stuff that was going on?
It unifies basically all of these different scientific principles that our mainstream science has problems with. And until our mainstream science drops their theory and begins to embrace the fact that the universe is a plasmic electric universe and a torsion universe, both are true. These are the sciences that the secret space program bases their technology off of. They're not going to progress any further than we are now using this 18th and early 19th century technology.
Well, since we're talking about math a little bit here, more than a little bit, I'm thinking about now the basis of superstring theory, quantum mechanics, all this stuff that the skeptics are going to try to use to attack us and say, oh, well, it's all been proven. Almost all the math that goes into superstring theory was from this Indian mathematician named Srinivasa Ramanujan. And Ramanujan was this genius who re-derived 100 years worth of Western mathematics on his own with one book and came out with all this stuff that nobody knew what the heck it was, called modular functions. And basically what he's saying is geometry is the key to these higher dimensions. Now they're still using all that stuff in superstring. Nothing has supplanted it yet. The important part is that Ramanujan said that the Hindu goddess Namakal was teaching him all this stuff in a dream. So do you think that various benevolent extraterrestrials have been trying to seed this knowledge into our society?
Yeah, that higher dimensional beings have been trying to get us to... I was told that our lifetimes are very short. We basically die as spiritual children. We were meant to live much longer and have much longer of a time to spiritually develop.
When you say I was told, who told you?
I was told this by raw tier air.
One of the blue aliens. Okay.
And
so we're spiritual children?
We're spiritual children at the time of our death, and that's if we live a very long, hearty life.
Right.
So we need help in these short lifetimes to advance, to get some advancement. And we are receiving help from higher dimensional or higher density beings to be given information in dreams and in other ways to help us progress at the end of what they're calling a major cycle, to where we need to get to where we need to be quickly.
Was the term major cycle used to you in your own communication with the Blue Avians?
They called it we're at the end of a major cycle.
Huh, that's exactly what they call it in the Law of One. That's something we'd never discussed before. It's another correlation. All right, well, we're trying to stay on topic here. Getting back to the science of time, when they sent these probes through the sun, did the probe go somewhere else, or was it just that they mapped the interior out like that?
It mapped the interior out, sent back telemetry until it succumbed to the forces inside the sun. It was basically a little suicide mission for this probe.
Right.
It was meant to go in, gather data, and send back telemetry as long as it could.
One of the things that strikes me is you're describing a rocky metallic core with a cloud around it. It sounds sort of like the description of Jupiter or Saturn in terms of what we know is in the center.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a relationship between a star and a planet based on what you were told?
I'm not exactly... there's a relationship between a star and every planetoid in its system, an electromagnetic filament relationship. Anything that has a large enough density to twist space-time in a torsion field creates a relationship with its host star, and it creates a filament or an electromagnetic connection to its star. And each planet has a core that is the driving force, whether it's depending on how active the core is, of how strong that connection is.
In my original book, Source Field, I described the work of John Martineau, who wrote a really, really fascinating, groundbreaking book called A Little Book of Coincidence in Our Solar System. This was crazy because I'd written this whole book and it was at the very last minute, and I got this book handed to me and I had to change the whole book and add a chapter just on this guy. So here's what he's done. He's looked at the relationship of the planetary orbits to each other, and he's found that they perfectly can be described by a series of nested geometries. Most of these correlations, and we're talking the Platonic solids, so we're talking cube, tetrahedron, icosahedron, which is the 20-sided with equilateral triangles, looks like a disco ball, dodecahedron, which is pentagonal, 12 pentagonal faces.
These are a lot of the symbols that show up in this hyperdimensional mathematics model.
Really?
When I've mentioned
They
that,
draw the symbol of the Platonic?
yes,
Oh my God.
when I say there's very few numbers and that there are a lot of symbols, a lot of these geometric Platonic solids and a lot of other things are symbols that are in this mathematics model.
Well, that totally makes sense. All the modern superstring people are using Ramayunan's modular functions, and they're mapping them onto Platonic geometry, and they're saying these modular functions are descriptions of geometry. So the geometry is already in the hyperdimensional math. It's just people don't usually know that.
And it's focusing too much on the quanta, the quantum physics, and when really we've found out that everything is just vibration, is a vibratory state. And once you really realize that everything around you is a vibratory state, and time and matter and space can all be manipulated once you realize or learn how to do it, learn how to manipulate the vibration, the vibratory state of everything around you, then all of these other sciences that all of the doubters are saying are proof that what I'm saying is wrong, it all fades away.
Yeah, and this is something that if people are watching our show, there's so much great scientific information in wisdom teachings that you could spend a whole year of your life just getting into. One of the things I talk about is Dr. Robert Moon, who was one of the founding fathers of the atomic bomb, one of the single most important scientists in making it work. And in 1987, he discovered that the protons in the atom were actually corners of geometry. And he totally maps it out, and I have multiple episodes where we go into all that stuff. And I highly recommend, if people are interested in this, that they check that out.
Yeah. Basically what I've said when I've been talking about Gaiam is that it's more of an online university.
It's a parallel university.
Yeah, it's an online university of content. Then I had no idea how much of this type of information was already out there until I started looking around.
When I start clicking through, it's like I don't have enough lifetimes. You got to start somewhere. But the reason why I wanted to bring in Robert Moon for a second is we're kind of getting into the unified geometric model now. So we have Dr. Hans Jenny, Jenny, the European scientist who vibrates water with sand in it. And you vibrate the sand and you get sacred geometry. And what does that tell us? Geometry is vibration. Vibration creates structure. And this geometry, which is in all these dimensions, is the structure of vibration. So it's exactly what you just said.
Yeah. And is he being totally ignored by mainstream science?
Of course.
This is information that's being suppressed. And this is not just theory that I'm tossing out here. This is working science that is being used in the secret space programs and has been used for a long time. And a lot of this is information that has been handed down to us by extraterrestrial races that are millions of years ahead of us technologically and have been using these concepts and sciences and mathematic models for eons.
It was almost 100 years ago that Rutherford shot electrons through gold foil, and some of them stuck, and that was what made him say it must be a particle, because he's shooting these things through and some of them don't make it through. That's called the Rutherford model of the atom. Oh, it's a little solar system, and there's little planets whirling around a nucleus. Did they laugh at that Rutherford model in the space program? Did they think people were nuts for thinking that particles are solid?
Well, yes, because we also know that consciousness has an effect on the outcome of every experiment. If you took someone who had a preconceived idea that everything is a wave and they start doing these experiments, they're going to have the outcome that everything's a wave.
Sure. I think really when we bring in Moon, we've now got a geometric model for the atom, meaning that matter is a vibration. That just solves it right there.
Everything's a vibration. As I said, thought, light, everything around us, they're all different states of vibration. And even our consciousness, and especially our mass consciousness, can change the nature of the vibration of matter and our reality around us.
One of the things that the space program insider Jacob told me is that the reason why people used to have to look into a crystal ball or a mirror to see and communicate with spirits is that we believe that spirits don't exist, so they won't be allowed to be seen right in front of us. But we can bend the rules. If we see them in a mirror or in a crystal, we can say, well, maybe that's a reflection or something like that.
Going back to there is no spoon.
Right.
Wow.
So is it true? Have you also heard in your work what I've heard from other insiders, which is that one of the greatest secrets from us is that reality is a co-creative generation by our consciousness?
Yes, that's one of the largest secrets that they've tried to keep from us, and they've tried to suppress. There's been many scientific experiments that have proven this, and they've suppressed those. They've suppressed, the scientific information about the electric and plasmic universe, about, the nature of space and time. They've suppressed torsion physics. They've gone really heavily after to suppress, and the effects of consciousness on reality, they've worked heavily to suppress.
All the way back in 1939, there's a scientist named Otto Hilgenberg who had a very compelling model that the Earth must be expanding and that all the continents fit together if you take out the oceans and then shrink the Earth down to 55 to 60% of its current size. There's been many other scientists since Hilgenberg who have come forward with even further detail. So let's take a look right now at the illustration of the Earth expansion. So what we're seeing there is the continents drift apart, the oceans fill up the cracks, but here's a big problem. They're still saying, oh, continental drift, plate tectonics. There's one big landmass, and it broke somehow, and now it's wanting to go in different directions. What happens if the Earth is expanding? What does that do to our science?
Well, it turns everything on its head. If a planet is expanding from the inside, that goes against would go against what mainstream science is saying.
Well, it would mean that matter is being continually generated from nothing, right? the Earth itself is growing like a living thing.
Right. And of course, the Earth is constantly accumulating an extreme amount of cosmic dust and debris all the time. Tons and tons and tons a day that are coming in through our atmosphere.
Right.
That is also adding to the density of the planet.
When we go back and we look at the John Martineau model of the solar system, what we're seeing is that as the planet moves, there's a giant geometry that covers its entire orbital size, and that geometry is moving with the planet as it rotates. So what you're describing with these stargates forming between the planets is very likely that these geometries we're talking about have an electrical charge, and when you line up the nodes, you're getting
Nodes.
a plasma filament.
That, you stole the word right out of my consciousness. They are called nodes. And the Earth, everyone knows about ley lines, and the Earth has an energetic grid.
I've been building into that in my show. We haven't actually covered it yet.
Okay.
In my other books and website, it's described, yeah.
Constantly, as the Earth is rotating, and depending on its relationship in space to the sun and the behavior of the sun, that depends on each of these where they cross, and depending on also the elements of what's underground, the type of stone or crystal, metal under mountains or under the ground, creates a node, and that's what they call it, a node. And a stargate will appear along these nodes, either on the surface of the Earth, just below the surface, or in the upper atmosphere above, in these node regions. And they focus on these node regions to look for where these natural stargates are going to open. And this is also, they watch for these also for intruders, ETs that would appear in our skies. And strangely enough, many of them were appearing along the 33rd and 36th parallel north. The node systems in that area seem to be where they were coming and going quite a bit.
Well, since I haven't actually done this on Wisdom Teachings yet, let me just toss in that I've lectured extensively. Most of my talks I cover Ivan T. Sanderson, and he is the source of the Bermuda Triangle scholarship. Charles Berlitz actually was the one who wrote the book called The Bermuda Triangle that put that into the public consciousness. But he was only drawing off of Ivan Sanderson's research. Sanderson found 10 points around the Earth where all of the ships on the sea and all the planes in the sky were disappearing. And they all clustered around these same points. And then that was published in 1971, and then in 1972, the Russians figured out that you add the North and South Pole, and you get an icosahedron. It's a perfect sacred geometry on the Earth. And then the future scholars from there, and again I'm going to cover this a lot more in future Wisdom Teachings episodes, found that the icosahedron is one shape, but that the dodeck is also perfectly nested in with it. And when you put those two shapes together and you draw those lines over the Earth, it tells you where the continents are.
Well, this also matches, these shapes were placed in there was a sphere to represent the Earth, and they placed these different shapes inside the sphere to where the points were coming out at like 19 degrees here, at different points of the Earth's rotation around the sun, and also different times of the sun's cycle. They would use different shapes inside spheres to
So
represent.
you're saying that some of the geometry would actually come to a point above the surface of the Earth, and those lines would cross in the sky somewhere?
Right.
And that's where the node was, or the portal was?
And that's where the predicted nodes would be.
Is this the kind of stuff that the Germans were using, getting back to what we talked about before, where there'd be a sphere and they'd send tanks through or whatever?
No, these were holographic depictions
Oh,
that were used in current era.
okay. When we're talking about the geometry of the grid, why do you think planes and ships disappear at these nodes? What's the secret sauce?
They're in the wrong place at the wrong time. When the cosmic web activates a particular node region, and they happen to be in that region when it goes active, and these are natural portals, they're in the wrong place at a wrong time, and they're portaled, and they're very bizarre. These, depending on where they are in the region of the portal, they could be portaled in time or space. So they could be portaled into a different time on Earth or somewhere else in the galaxy or beyond.
That actually makes sense to me, because the physics model that other insiders have told me is what they call layered time. We want to see time as this thing that's all stretched out. But if you could think about like that the solar system itself is a geometry, then each geometric ratcheting point is actually all stacked in on itself like an onion. They're not actually apart in time. The geometry all folds together. It's all nested like multiple tetrahedrons that all lock up at certain points.
You see geometry depicted in all parts of these different Black Ops programs and the secret space program. Geometry is popping up everywhere.
So if the past is in one geometry and our now is in another, and then those two forms lock together, you could have a portal that pops you through all these different layers of geometry that we think of as separate points in time, but they're all actually in the same space.
Right.
Same space. It's not really space, but
One of the
absolute space.
scientist eggheads said that figuring out these nodes and the geometry and the cycle of the sun's 11-year cycle, its activity, sunspots, flares, and our position in our solar system was like having a galactic Rubik's Cube that you're trying to figure out real quickly.
Let me ask you a strange question,
Okay.
as if this isn't already strange. Are any of those geometries outside or inside, meaning future or past, are any of those other geometries real besides the one that we're in? Are there other geometries at all, or is there only one real geometry?
They're all real, and they're all happening at once, because time is an illusion. There is no beginning, middle, and end as we experience time.
But when something happens in history, we write the history books. It's not like the books are changing as far as we can tell.
This is how we experience time with our third density minds. Time is all at once happening, and it's a hard thing to try to communicate to people that time is not linear, that time is an illusion, and that it's our consciousness that is causing time to be experienced in a linear way. So
That is a difficult adjustment.
yeah, it's a very difficult thing to try to make people understand.
Well, speaking of time, we actually are out of time, in this particular episode. So we actually have to quantize things into a half an hour. So what's going to happen here is in the next episode, we're going to get into one of the subjects that you have told us you're the most fascinated about in your comments, and that is the Stargate in your brain, the pineal gland, the third eye. We're going to talk about that coming up next time here on Cosmic Disclosure, because you need to know. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I thank you for watching.